So, hi everybody, thanks so much for joining. Welcome to the kind of Parsha class of the week. What it is it is calendrical. This is the class where we care about the calendar, right? So whether it's the weekly rhythm of the Torah Parsha, or whether it's what's called in halachic terminology, inyana de yoma, right? The matter of the day. So, that comes from the notion that like 30 days before Passover, you're supposed to start reviewing the laws of Passover. And then that kind of becomes a general rule of thumb. Like around the time as the holiday approaches, you start getting ready for the holiday. So this is our pre-Chanukah shiur, or maybe more precisely, this is a shiur, as a class where we're going to think about what the Jewish meaning of the winter is. Like what is the spiritual significance of the winter? And is it actually something that's not just something that's Jewish, but something even that's like that the Talmud or the rabbis start to imagine is even universal? So we see some really interesting thinking happening in the Gemara that takes into consideration like the significance of other religious holidays. So the main text we're going to be looking at is from Maseches Avodah Zarah, which is the Talmudic tractate which deals with the vicissitudes, the complexities, and sometimes the challenges of existing as a minority population in a majority culture. So the tractate literally means the tractate of idol worship. It's not telling us how to do it, but rather telling us how to relate to non-Jewish religions. Something the rabbis are very conscious about and very conscientious about. So that'll be the centerpiece of this class, but we'll start actually by looking at a text that's very understudied but very important for understanding the Jewish calendar and grounding ourselves in Tkufat Tevet, the season of the winter, and the month of Kislev. So let's look at this text. It's called Megillat Ta'anit, the scroll of the fasts, and it is perhaps the most one of the earliest rabbinic texts that we have. And it is not in the Talmud, but what we have are a lot of parallel traditions that are relevant for what ends up becoming normative in rabbinic Judaism. So this is actually very, very interesting to look at. And then, because I'm me, we'll end it, of course, with a little bit of Chassidus. We'll look at a little bit of Hasidic teaching as well. So this class is called the Soulstice, and I insist that it's a good joke because it is a good joke, the Soulstice. So this is from Megillat Ta'anit talking about the significance of Chanukah, and it says, on the 25th of the month of Chanukah is Chanukah, 8 days on which one does not eulogize. So the reason is that this scroll is called Megillat Ta'anit, scroll of fasts, because what it tells us are, here are the days on the calendar in which you are not allowed to do negative stuff. These are the holidays or quasi-holidays in which you're not allowed to fast or you're not allowed to eulogize, right? Which, i.e. to observe mourning practices. And here are the days in which you do fast. Here are the days in which you can. And a lot of those are like the normal fasts we know about, like Tisha B'Av and Asara B'Tevet and fasts like that, but also some other fasts that were common in the rabbinic community, in the rabbinic society that haven't really survived to this day. Okay, so even at first, right, what we have is a very surprising element, because when are Jewish holidays usually? Like when are Jewish special times? Think month-wise.
Middle of the month, like Pesach and Sukkot.
Good, okay, good. So yeah, two of the biggest holidays, Pesach, Sukkot, they both happen on the 15th of a very important month, right? Tishrei and Nisan, both of them very important months. Good. When else do Jewish special times happen? Let's put it that way. Oh, let's say Purim, right? Purim's the 14th of the month. That's also around the new moon, around the full moon. Tu B'Shvat, 15th of the month, right?
Rosh Hashanah is the first.
Rosh Hashanah is the first of the month. What else is the first of the month? Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the month is at the beginning of the month. That one was a trick question. It's fine. You guys the problem is you're too smart. And of course you're like, I can't say Rosh Chodesh because he literally said beginning of the month. So I just be repeating him. So I appreciate your respect in terms of not wanting to waste any time. So what we have here though is an odd holiday, let's start by talking about a different odd holiday. Shavuos. Right, Shavuos happens on, actually what's funny is that in the Talmud, there's a debate around when Shavuos should happen or when the revelation of the Torah happened. They don't know because Shavuos is tied to a different holiday, right? But it's 7 weeks after the first day of the holiday of Passover. It's a bit complicated, right? But it ends up being a weird day because it ends up being the 6th of Sivan. And that's just odd, right? Because it's just, the 6th, who cares? Point is, the reason it's weird is because it's not tied to a specific lunar event. It is tied, however, to the calendar, right? It's tied to a week cycle, 7 weeks of the Omer from Passover to Shavuos. Fine, but what's interesting, right, is a week is judged according to days. Days are judged according to the sun. So another way of putting it is, the normal Jewish holidays, the ones that feel regular or normal, happen at an event of the moon. New moon, full moon, because the Jewish calendar is lunar based, right? It is lunar based. It is a lunar calendar. However, unlike the Muslim calendar, the Jewish calendar is also tweaked by the sun. Specifically, it's also an agricultural calendar, and it needs to stay in tune with the changing of the seasons. It wouldn't make sense anymore for the harvest holiday of Sukkot to suddenly be in the spring when you plant things, right? It doesn't make sense for the wheat festival or the barley festival, right, Passover or Shavuos, to be happening when those things aren't being harvested. So we have a delicate balance the Jewish calendar needs to play between the majority influence of the moon, but also it's attending to the sun. So there's some influence for the sun. Rachel Elior, who's an Israeli scholar of mysticism, argues, although personally I'm not persuaded, but she believed that there was like an ancient conflict between the different Jewish sects in the Second Temple period, that the Sadducees, right, which broke off from the Pharisees, right, which are more similar to Rabbinic Judaism, had only a solar calendar. And part of what was going on was a battle within the temple between a solar and a lunar calendar. And that's why actually a 365-day calendar is seen actually as being like something bad and something to stay away from, it says in the Talmud, very interestingly. Here we have our lunar calendar with some solar tweaks to it. And now let's go back to the Megillat Ta'anit. The 25th of the day of Kislev is Chanukah. That is odd, right? It's not tied to any kind of lunar event. The 25th of a winter month being a holiday, though, is something we're very familiar with living in the modern West or the Christian West. The 25th of December being, of course, Nittelnacht, right? Being, well, 24th being Nittelnacht, right? It being the day in which Kratzmich, right? The day in which a certain nice Jewish boy is being celebrated by his mother and other people. So yeah, the fact that we also have a holiday that happens on the 25th of the month in the winter is very interesting. And it's something that's it's always intrigued me and kind of bothered me, right? Like, what, is there some kind of weird, let's say, trans-Jewish connection, right? Not like something that goes beyond just Judaism, about something about this time in the winter that seems to inspire some kind of attention from not just Jewish culture, but other human cultures, religious cultures as well. And that's what we're going to look into. So very interesting is that in this case, we see that, we have like the classic story, like the rabbinic story, in which they focus on the miracle of the oil, not on the paramilitary victory over the imperialist forces, of course. And, tell the story of the oil, we're just going to skip that. But they keep on coming back to this question, right? One question is 25, why the 25th day? Because the day they found the oil, fine. It says the following year they decreed that these 8 days are to be days of celebration. And the question now is, why 8? And it's a very interesting question, because if Chanukah is supposed to be recapitulating the dedication of the Mishkan, right, in the Torah, that only took 7 days. And it says it very explicitly in the Chumash that it only took 7 days. So why is Chanukah 8 days? Now, the answer we're not going to get into is the way in which Chanukah is actually in some ways a redo of Sukkot. because they missed Sukkot because the temple was occupied by the Syrian Greeks. So they did a kind of a substitute Sukkot instead. So that is, in Sukkot is 8 days, right? First day through Shmini Atzeret. We're not going to go into that, but instead we'll focus on the fact that they are confused. They don't mention Sukkot in Megillat Tani. They don't have that answer, right? They say instead, what reason was it 8 days? Because in the days of the kingdom of Greece, the Hasmoneans entered the temple, built the altar, plastered it with plaster, and for 7 days they were preparing the vessels for service. The rededication done by the Hasmoneans to be marked is to be marked for all generations. And why is it a practice for all generations? Good question. Right? Why wasn't it just a holiday that just was like a Purim Shel Yom? Right? Why wasn't it just a holiday that just happened for them? They were very excited about it, but they established it as a holiday lidorot, right? A holiday for us too. So that's very interesting. Why is it a holiday for all generations? They fixed it when they established the holiday when they came out from a narrow place into broad spaces, which is a metaphor for when they were able to celebrate. And they said praises and thanksgiving, lighting lamps and purity. Now, I don't know about you, but that wasn't a very good answer. They didn't explain why it's 8 days. They gesture towards the answer about the oil above, but that's not enough for them because they still, the Megillah still needs to ask, why 8 days? And why is it lidorot, right? Why is it for everybody? These are good questions. How would you say they're great questions? But not only that, but there's something very interesting here too. Because not only was it that the Hasmoneans recaptured the temple and rededicated it to God, but there seems to be implied an idea that the Syrian Greeks themselves took over the temple during that period, namely around the time of Chanukah. Why is that the case? So why is there a specific time in which a non-Jewish culture needed to appropriate a sacred space and turn it towards their nefarious, idolatrous ends, right? Do they also have a holiday during this period that they needed to pay attention to? The answer, of course, is yes. Yes, they did. Who wants to take a guess at what the holidays are? These are, okay, sorry. So there are 2 holidays in the Roman pagan calendar that the Mishnah, which I didn't include, says are holidays that the Jews are not allowed to do things that look like they're participating in these holidays. You know, we just did American Thanksgiving recently, and American Thanksgiving is actually a really interesting halachic question. And it ends up becoming a test case for how much religious Jews are allowed to assimilate into a majority culture. And there are a number of rabbis who were very strict about Thanksgiving, saying, actually, you can't do Thanksgiving because it's what's called you're following in their ways. B'darchechem lo seilechu, right? And the way Darchei Amori, or the ways of the Amorites, you're not supposed to imitate them. They're supposed to maintain a cultural distinction between you and the majority culture. Now, I love turkey very much, so I have real challenges with these chumras. But still, the point is, there's discomfort in the rabbinic tradition for just being absorbed into the national civic religion. There is a requirement to maintain some kind of distinction. So there are a number of Roman holidays that the Mishnah lists as days in which we need to maintain a sense of difference or maintain a sense of not participating. Okay? 2 of those, now, does any like classics nerds know which holidays occur near the end of the year? So there's 2. One is called Kalends, and the other one is called, this one you've probably heard of, Saturnalia. Saturnalia, of course, celebrating Saturn, right? Which one of the Roman gods. So Kalenda, or Kalends, is during the 8 days after the winter solstice. And Saturnalia, says Rav Chanan bar Rava, is during the 8 days before the winter solstice. So already we're a little bit twigged, because the holidays are not tied, again, to the lunar events, but are rather tied to the solar event, right? We have 2 equinoxes. There's the vernal and the autumnal equinox, right? Which are in the spring and the fall, respectively. And there's the summer and winter solstice, right? And they are respectively the longest day and the shortest day of the year. Okay, and how do we remember that there are these two holidays that bracket the winter solstice, which, by the way, I'm not sure actually if you're familiar with. Actually, there's rabbinic terminology for the different seasons, and they're named after the months in which they happen. So Tukufat Nisan is the season of spring. Tukufat Tevet is the season of winter. Tevet is when the winter solstice happens. There we go. So how do you remember that there are these two holidays bracketing the winter solstice? Because it says, you have hemmed me in behind and before. Achor v'kedem sirtani, right? And sirtani is like a negative. You've given me tsuris, before and after. And that's how you remember that there are these Gentile holidays before and after the winter solstice. But interestingly, the winter solstice itself seems to be something less ambivalent. Okay, so pause. Just to recap, we have the problem of Chanukah. It's the 25th day of a winter month. Seems to be odd when you think about the way Jewish holidays usually work. And you can say, fine, it's got a historical reason for it because it's tied to the recapturing and the rededication of the temple. But Megillat Ta'anit, one of the earliest rabbinic texts, is still troubled by it to ask, why is it on the 25th day and why is it 8 days? Second of all, we have evidence for two ancient Roman holidays, Saturnalia and Calenda, that bracket the winter solstice, which ends up being pretty darn close to when Hanukkah occurs in the deepest, darkest part of the winter. So, is there something happening between different cultures that is attending to or responding to the encroaching darkness as it takes over our time and our life? Are we venturing into darkness together in some way? Okay, quick pause. Questions, objections, comments, thoughts, reflections? Anything that you're wanting to share? Okay, so let's keep on rocking and rolling.
Sorry, I got to a microphone a little bit late. I might be jumping sort of too far ahead. Maybe this is something you will address later. But you saying that, what strikes me is, but maybe if that's somehow problematic within the kind of like the cyclical sort of spiritual Jewish calendar, only because like we've just had the days of awe. And it just feels like that whole process in some way is like a passage through like a dark night of the soul in some sense, you know?
Oh, interesting.
And so it just feels weird if you're kind of creating that calendar and thinking of like some kind of like rhythm, like spiritual rhythm to it, that just as people like left, you know, experienced maybe their greatest sort of inner darkness and left it and are now like looking forward to new possibilities now that they've confronted that now again you would have to, because of the season, deal with darkness. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, it's interesting too, especially because like, at least traditionally speaking or rabbinically speaking, Yom Kippur at least is one of the happiest days of the year. And we have this notion of it, I think, especially since it kind of, the mourning aspects of it or the martyrological aspects of it take on so much tonal weight, especially in the Ashkenazic world. You know, I think inheriting like histories of trauma around the Crusades, especially. But it's a day of release, and like, yeah, you're doing intense spiritual work, but it's joyous work, theoretically at least, because there is a responsive and forgiving God on the other side. Whereas I think you're right that like here we are, you know, we're not just like the long dark night of the soul in the words of Juan de la Cruz, but also like the long dark night of the body, right? But we know that, like, you know, at least especially the Jewish notion of the nefesh, that the soul and the body are connected to each other, they respond to each other. So, you know, as like we lose daylight and the like, you know, we start to we encounter a physical condition that easily becomes a metaphor, right? And I think what we're going to encounter is like, what meaning do the seasons have? Like, what meaning and really that's asking, what meaning does our experience have? Like, how religiously significant is our experience? And it's a good question. But great, yeah, great quick question about, like, you know, about the calendars moving, right, from the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. But, you know, you think like, well, can't we get a break? But in a sense, like, I think what we're going to look at is Hanukkah as, you know, not just a historical commemoration of resistance, but an existential holiday of resistance, of what it means to actually confront the darkness. Like, what does it mean to, like, acknowledge and to respond to the dark? And can we spark our light within it? So let's go weiter, forward. Tanrabanan, right? We bring a rabbinic teaching, and it seems to just kind of jump to it. The rabbis don't explain why they're suddenly now zooming all the way back to the beginning of human history. When Adam the first, Adam Arishon, saw that the day was progressively diminishing after the equinox, right, moving towards the solstice, he said, "Woe is me! Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder." Pause. Okay, there's a lot to unpack in this. It's an incredible brisa. Okay, so going back to Leon's point, when was the human being created? Hayom, 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 hayom.
Day 6?
Yeah, well, day 6, yeah, but which day on the calendar?
Yom Shishi.
What day on the calendar? Rosh Hashanah.
Oh,
Rosh
of
Hashanah, we
course. Yes,
usually
yes,
think
yes,
it's the
yes,
beginning
yes.
of creation, but what's interesting is that actually the rabbis tweak it and say, no, it's actually the beginning of human life is on Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah, right, happens in the fall. And that's around the time of the inflection point, right? You know, the day is equal at the autumnal equinox. So then moving forward into the fall, right, after Rosh Hashanah, into the winter, what ends up happening? The days get shorter and shorter. So Adam, who has literally never experienced life before, suddenly he was created, he was put in paradise, and then suddenly now the days are becoming shorter and shorter, and he wonders to himself, oh God, what did I do? Right? Because he thinks, in a sense, everything is his fault. Yeah, so you know, there's Susie's asking about like when were Adam and Eve kicked out of the garden. You know, there's like a lot of rabbinic workings out of this, and you know, like some of it has like basically within the space of like 2 weeks, like they were gone, right? It all happened very, 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 very quickly. Here, I think, you know, unclear whether he's in the garden anymore. Like maybe he's like living his life after the garden. Point is, he's never, you know, he's a newly born creature. It's a bria chadasha. It's a new creature. He has not experienced life before, so he sees suddenly the way of the world begin to change on him, and he wonders, not irrationally, what did I do? Did I break the universe? And he says, maybe it's because I sinned, and because I sinned, I broke creation. You know, I screwed up big time, and because I screwed up big time, the world is now, in a sense, not just like becoming worse, it's ending. Because think about it. Creation emerged out of chaos, and part of that was the differentiation between light and darkness. But if now the darkness is overtaking the light again, as the days get shorter and shorter, maybe Adam thinks the world is sinking back into tohu vavohu, right? Sinking back into the primordial state, chaos. Very scary, right? I mean, imagine like his existential terror. He doesn't have a sense of what nature is. All he has a sense is what he's experienced, right? It's like the way a baby, right, like learns what habits are, or learns what, like, you know, what to expect from the world, you know, object permanence, right? Adam didn't have solar permanence yet. He didn't recognize that the sun has certain rhythms it takes, right? So he said, perhaps because I sinned, the world is going back into chaos. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, right? Like part of the curse, right, after Adam and Chava sinned was that death entered human experience. And maybe Adam says, okay, I've been doomed to die eventually, but has actually all of creation also been doomed to die? Right, so we have, I think, you know, going back to Leon's point again, is that like we don't just have a long dark night of the soul of Adam, you know, like kind of recovering from the trauma of the first human sin. But we also have, very interestingly, a long dark night of the universe, right? In which Adam sees, he projects onto the world his own anxiety, his own sense of guilt around his failure, right? His having slipped up and made a mistake. So what did he do? He got up and he fasted for 8 days and he prayed, right? He did tchina utfilah, and he did ta'anit, right? He tried to do atonement through, diminishing his body in some way to show his contrition, to show that he is trying to atone in some way. But once he saw that nature existed, once he saw that it was Tukufat Tevet, i.e., the winter solstice, and saw that after that, the day started to get longer again, what was he able to do? He was able to realize that that is the way of the world. What's the shift then for Adam? The shift is between his experience of the universe, which is entirely contiguous with his experience of himself, and a notion that there is an independent world that he exists within, which has its own rhythms and its own rules, and that while he does impact the universe in his ability to contribute to the world, it is not identical with him. It's not the same thing. That there is nature in which the universe works a certain kind of way. Thoughts? Ideas? Okay, it's a wild brisa we're seeing. It's a wild Agga that we're looking at right now. It's wild. So interestingly, like another holiday, yes.
I'm just wondering, when was this written? You probably mentioned when you introduced this text, but I can't remember.
So it's a brisa, which means it's a Tannaitic tradition. So we can presume it's from, again, like it's preserved from the 2nd century. It's it might have been older than that, but it's a Tannaitic tradition, which means, early Common Era. But again,
Okay.
problem with ancient texts, right, is that's not about authorship. It's about, kind of, being a bearer of the tradition.
Right. Interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. So like another holiday that we were just talking about, in which it wasn't just responsive to the moment, but they established it for generations, Chanukah, Adam also took his experience of working through that anxiety, wondering if, in a sense, he broke the universe. Right? Ralph breaks the world, right? He broke the universe in some way or another. And he takes both the guilt and also the relief. And what does he do? He established holidays before the winter solstice and after the winter solstice. Before the winter solstice, he established 8 days of fasting. After the winter solstice, he established 8 days of feasting. Does that sound familiar? Sure does, because it's what we started this pericope with at the beginning of the Gemara. Namely, there are 2 pagan holidays, Calenda and Saturnalia. I forget which is which. One of them is a holiday of feasting, and one of them is a holiday of fasting. I feel like Saturnalia is probably the good one, right? No, Saturnalia is the bad one. Okay, Saturnalia is the time before the winter solstice, and Calenda is after the winter solstice. So Saturnalia, 8 days of fasting, Calenda, 8 days of feasting. It sure seems to be what the rabbis are saying Adam designed. Now, what's weird about this, right, is that in like the rabbinic imagination, everyone's a Jew, right? Adam's a Jew, Noah's a Jew, we're all Jews, right? Even though the Jewish people starts at Avram Avinu, still, even the before Avram characters are still kind of like proto-Jews. But here what we have is the rabbis, in a sense, tipping their hat to the fact that Adam Harishon is the universal origin of all humankind. And because of that, then, is also, in a sense, the source of all human culture. So we have these holidays, right? He established these holidays l'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven. But they established them, right, as they progressed and pagan society took over, established them for idol worship. Fascinating, right? So what we have then is this proto Jewish tradition or universal human tradition of responding to our experience of nature by sanctifying it. Adam Arishon learned the hard way of what the rhythms of nature look like and acknowledged, in a sense, the way in which the encroaching darkness affects us and the relief as the days get longer relieves us, right? The days of the impending, lengthening of the days makes life harder for us. And as the sun breaks, right, and the winter solstice ends and we move forward into spring, that is when life starts to get a little bit better. Now we know all about vitamin D and seasonal affective disorder and all these things, but I think, without pathologizing it or without like medicalizing it, we have here a real sensitive experiential attunement or attention to our experience of nature. Adam Rishon says, it is very easy to internalize and to take personally the rhythms of the world. But there's this thing external to us called nature. It's the way of the world, and it works independent of us. And I can both acknowledge my experience of it by instituting these fasts and feast days, but also say that there is this inflection point of the solstice that is what's hinging it. It's the way in which the world works. So we can have seasons. So we can have, the way in which we derive food from the planet and all the ways in which the world needs seasons to work. Now, I don't want to go inside in this text, but I included it because it's an incredible addition to this, is that the rabbis then include another tradition in which this is actually why we have Havdalah. So we have a connection in the sense between the winter solstice, which again, we are already tying to Chanukah, and Havdalah, another ritual event in which we spark a light in the darkness. We use light to distinguish between holy and profane, between darkness and light. Right? On the day that Adam was created, literally going all the way to the 6th day of creation, like his first day of life, the sun starts to set and he has like a mini version of the same crisis. He's like, oh God, the sun has set. Maybe I did something to cause the world to like end. The sun rose, cool, great. And the sun sets and like, oh God, the world's over. You don't know that the world is going to continue until you have another sunrise. How would Adam know? He's not been alive before. You don't know that the days are going to get longer until you have a winter solstice. So winter solstice then becomes, or sunrise and sunset become these gifts for human experience, showing us that there is there's a consistency to nature and a constancy beyond us.
How come he didn't just believe that because he fasted and repented, that that's the reason why the light started to come back? Or didn't matter what the reason was, the fact was that the light was coming back.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? He did like fast and repent and then the light came back. So maybe like it worked. I don't know. Maybe if the days stopped and they, it like kind of stopped at a certain point and it didn't get longer again, maybe he wouldn't have drawn that conclusion. But it seems like even after he has the 8 days, and then it like starts to get longer again, independent of him anyway. That's a very good point. You could like make a very thrum reading of this and say, it's because he davened and that's why we have the seasons. But for, it's very interesting, right? Because he spends all, this one's even more like intense. He spends all the time, not just fasting, but crying, right? With Eve. But at the break of dawn, it says, this is actually the order of the world. So, I think there's like a comfort to the fact that actually it doesn't all depend on him in some way. It's not like a ritually responsive world. We have a thing called nature, which exists independent of human action. And that's like, again, it's like relieving. There's like a notion that nature responds to us, with a thing of like climate change, or thinking of it like more religious terms, if you impurify the land, it will vomit you out, right? It says in Devarim. But on the other hand, right, there's also a notion in which like the world is beyond us and the world is bigger than us and we impact it, but it's, but it has in a sense its own life. Maimonides actually says like every aspect of creation has its own telos to it, right? Every aspect of creation has its own purpose. So like he actually like kind of really says there's this thing called nature, right? And actually it's because nature has its own reasons for existing. It's not just, not everything's focused on the human being. Okay. So pause, recap, and then we'll I think like kind of abstract from this. So the rabbis, in asking why are these pagan holidays exist, 8 days before of fasting, 8 days after the winter solstice of feasting, Saturnalia and Calenda respectively, end up actually tying it to literally the source of all human beings, Adam Arishon, and his existential response to the encroaching or increasing darkness as winter comes in, and that he saw it as in some way punishment, some way responsive to his sin, to his mistake, and then was able to discover, in a sense, like the joy and the relief of the way of the world, right, in which the way nature functions. So there is the challenge of the darkness, which he acknowledges, but also the crack of hope that opens as he notices that, like, there is a tomorrow. The sun will rise, the days will get longer, the spring is coming, right? And at the deepest, darkest point in the winter, the solstice, right? That's also the time the next day, when the very next day is going to get a little bit longer, right? There's going to be a little bit more sun the next day. So every extreme is also the opposite extreme at the same time. The deepest, darkest day is also the day on which the light starts to get longer as well. Right? When you reach one end, there's an end to it, and then you start moving back. Right? There's a swinging pendular rhythm to the universe, right? In which you go all the way to the end, but it doesn't break you. You can take it, and then you start moving back. So we see this acknowledgement of the, like, the challenge of the darkness. I want to bracket its connection to Hanukkah, but I think the connection to Hanukkah is pretty clearly implied in the sense that, like, we too have a winter holiday in which we acknowledge the darkness and try to respond to it with light around the time of the winter solstice. And it's not the same, but it's also an 8-day holiday in which you're not allowed to feast and you're supposed to, you're not allowed to fast and you're supposed to feast. So it seems pretty not dissimilar, right, to these universal, even non-Jewish holidays that we saw mentioned by the rabbis. So what's going on? Or rather, in a sense, can we learn from the universal experience of the way that the darkness impacts us? Can we actually use that to realize or learn something new about the nature of Hanukkah as we approach it in actually just a week from now? That's the, like, we got through like the center text, but the center text left us with actually a beautiful challenge. Can we actually learn about Hanukkah better from zooming out our focus into the human experience of the time that we're in? Hanukkah as a unique Jewish holiday, perhaps, that's not about the moon, but it's really about our experience of the sun or lack thereof, right? Whereas most Jewish holidays are lunarly, oriented. This one is solar oriented. It's responding to, therapeutically, our lack of sun. I have to say, it's a bit of a chiddush, but let's see if I can pull it off. Okay, thoughts, objections, reflections.
Can I say something?
Of course.
I don't know if I'm on, I don't know if I'm seen or not, because
You're not seen.
Okay, good. So Hanukkah is the holiday that is a secondary holiday because it doesn't appear in Torah.
Yes.
And Hanukkah is has been secularized over the course of time. And I'm understanding what you're saying in your discussion, but I think you're trying to get the square peg in the round hole.
How so?
Relating Hanukkah so much so to Solstice, because Solstice is a pagan holiday, and I understand about the pagan holidays. And, I think that this is just a little too much of a push to try to get, you've already got your end result and you're trying to make your means justify your ends. Because I really think that Solstice is universal, and it is lunar and solar driven, because you're recognizing both the sun's time and the moon's time. And I don't believe Hanukkah is directly related to that. I think it's more culturally, historically ours, and has just been secularized too much. I mean, it's just not.
So I want to, yeah. So first of all, thank you for saying that. Like all I want is active engagement. And if you come away from this class infuriated, that's great. I don't want agreement, just engagement.
I'm not infuriated. I'm making my comments.
Oh no, I'm just being silly. But no, so I think there's a few ways, right? I think when you say secularized, I think we need to be very particular, because it's not just secularized, it's been Christianized in the sense that it's been marshaled to be part of like the Jewish parallel to the major Christian holiday of Christmas, right? We saw recently a tweet that made its rounds about how, like, if we pay attention to the holiest days of the Judeo-Christian calendar, it's important that we're able to gather in churches right now. It's like, I don't know about you, but as someone of half of that calendar, the Jewish part of it, I don't go to churches, so I don't see who you're not talking to me when you say that. But Hanukkah, interestingly, in terms of its historical reception, it kind of got like a second wind in the 18th century, and then again in the 19th century. 18th century with the Hasidic movement, and the 19th century, and here's where your point about secularism comes in, right? With the Zionist movement, right? Hanukkah becomes a counter-rabbinic holiday in the Zionist movement by, instead of stressing the religious miracle of the oil, it stresses instead the human agency of a minority Jewish population being able to resist imperial forces and take their own autonomy back, right? As kind of a proto-Zionist story. But before it became a Zionist holiday, it was a Hasidic holiday, in which the Hasidic relationship to it, which we're going to get into just now, was anything but secular, but rather saw Hanukkah as actually interestingly, taking your first point, that it is a non-biblical holiday. It's the only holiday not mentioned, only serious holiday not mentioned in the Bible, right? Like, yeah, fine, Tu B'Shvat, whatever, but Tu B'Shvat doesn't have any brachot. There are no mitzvot associated with Tu B'Shvat. On Hanukkah, you are actually obligated to sell your property to make sure that you're able to observe the mitzvah, and yet it's not biblical. Right? That's an astounding halachic, daring move by the rabbis. It is not a Torah holiday, and yet it is so important that you actually need to go into debt to observe it. The only other holiday you're supposed to do that for is matzah on Passover. So it has that level of significance, that central significance to it. And one of the ways in which the Hasidim especially see significance in that is that Hanukkah is then associated with the oral Torah. It's associated with the dialectic, the relationship between oral Torah and written Torah, and the room for the growth of Torah through human participation. But that's not a secular point to them. That, if anything, is a paradoxically religious point to them, that there's something so miraculous, in a sense, about Torah and about revelation, that it's able to extend itself in this way even beyond, right? Even beyond its source, even beyond its original context. And that's what's incredible about Hanukkah. It's a radical human manifestation of the divine. And actually, that's what next week's class on Hanukkah is going to be all about, the way in which Hanukkah is unique in Jewish holidays in terms of its radical commitment to God's presence, even when it is hidden and in the dark. So I think what I'm trying to draw the connection to solstice, I think you're quite right to say it would be wrong to say Hanukkah is just a Jewish winter solstice holiday. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have this thing called the winter solstice, in which we see a universal response to the shortening of days and the lengthening of the nights, the encroaching darkness, and the way in which that becomes a challenge to human well-being. And that ends up becoming then a pagan holiday, a non-Jewish holiday. And we saw a text in which we have a certain number of interesting similarities between Hanukkah and the solstice holidays. It's 8 days long. It happens around the same time. And I think it is not about the solstice, but is, I think, drawing from what it means to also respond to the dark. And that's what we're going to look at right now. The Hanukkah is a holiday that we have today too, in which we're learning how to bring light into the darkness. That as an essential aspect. It's not just like a cute or a sweet idea in Hanukkah, but it's actually essential to its substance. is that Chanukah too is a holiday that is about the play between light and dark and what it means to be in the midst of the deepest darkness and how do you get through it. So this is from a later Hasidic sefer called Tzidkas Tzadik by Reb Tzadok Kohen of Lublin, who was a late 19th, early 20th century Hasidic master. And, you know, he is someone who's especially attentive to the rhythms of day and night, of light and dark. He has a book that I'm not drawing from called Rasise Laila, The Sparkles of Night, which really grounds itself in that context. But here in his book called Tzidkas Tzadik, which is like his kind of theological discussion of what the religious life looks like in a general sense, he begins actually by in his earliest sections by talking about what it means to observe Torah at night, what it means to observe, to be an observant Jew or to do mitzvot, bring Torah, bring holiness into nighttime. So he says, and this is quite interesting, right? The first mitzvah you ever have to do as a bar or bas mitzvah is to say the Shema at night, because it's the first thing that happens after you've reached the age of maturity, or age of majority. And how do we know that? Because we derive the acceptance of the yoke of the king, right? Kabbalah's ol malchus shamayim, right? Accepting on ourselves the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, which is an essential aspect of the Shema, right? To commit yourself to a relationship with God from the creation of the world. At first it was dark, but one must accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven even from within the dark. In senselessness and lack of accomplishments, as in the end, one will accept it in abundance and in the radiance of the day with clear perception through which much is accomplished. Now we saw him immediately begin to make a metaphor out of darkness. He begins by saying literally the first thing a 13 or 12-year-old kid, when they reach the Jewish age of majority, needs to do as an adult is say the Shema at night, because the night is the beginning of their next day. They're now 13 or 12 years and 1 day old, and now they need to observe the Torah. But then he says, but the night is also a metaphor for the human experience of what it means to be starting out on a journey. Because they're minor, right? You're just starting your journey as a Jewish adult. You have nothing to lay claim to yet. You have not accomplished anything. You haven't done any mitzvos. It's the terror of the first step onto a new path. You have nothing that you can rely on and say, look, I've done it. All you have is the beginning. That's the night. Right? You're walking into the darkness of what the future holds for you, and you don't know what it's going to be like. But he says that is precisely when you need to do this. That's when you need to accept the ol malchus shamayim. It's specifically when it's the night. It's when it's dark, because that's what it really means to accept that relationship. Because you're not saying I deserve it. You're not saying I've earned it. You're saying I'm committing myself to eventually building myself up into being able to accept it in the daytime, as it were. You see that, like, this subtle and like eloquent transition from like the physical reality of the nighttime into the metaphorical, experiential reality of what the nighttime feels like. And that is exactly what Adam Arishon did as well. He experienced the changing of the seasons, the shortening of the days, and the increasing of the night, not just as something that was external to him, but he first internalized it. He said, like, I'm scared. I'm scared, and I need to respond to that fear in some way. And the Tzidkas Tzadik, that's Reb Tzadok Kohen, says, yes, like, it is scary, and that's real. The night is scary. The dark is scary. You don't know what's out there. You don't have what to to avail yourself of yet. All you have is what you're going to become. But that's exactly what faith is. Faith is to walk into the night. Faith is to accept on yourself something that you don't know what it's going to be like yet. Okay. Thoughts?
Can I offer something else? Do you
Please.
mind? So in creation, at the night, and this is why all of our holidays start Erev at night before the next day, there was only God present in the darkness. And so our acknowledgement of what we do at night is only our connectivity to God in full divinity, in full presence, everything we're doing. So when we're lighting the candles at night for Shabbos, or now we're talking about lighting for Chanukah, the different time frames that we're lighting are significant, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just that we're being present with God at night, but it's when the most silent part of the soul is with God, and we are bringing our light back in to reach and be acknowledged and to acknowledge. Is
That's
that
beautiful.
correct?
I mean, I don't know about correct, but that's gorgeous. That's a beautiful thought.
So when
Yeah.
we're so talk what you're talking about, what this
and you're intuiting actually what we're going to get into in the next Torah, which we're just about to start.
Oh, okay. So what you were talking about here was, I mean, I've got my Tanakh open and I'm looking at Genesis and I'm rereading while you're doing this, and
Great.
It just resonated. So my question then is, when we're lighting our Hanukkah candles, it's not the same as lighting Shabbos candles at the time. And can we talk about that a little bit?
We're going to, but through the portal of Passover. So you really got it. You really got it. But we need to walk the path to get there too. So beautiful. Okay.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you. So he continues. He deals with the issue of night. He takes a break from it, but then he comes back to it. It's still early on in his book, and Tzidkas Tzadik, same book, same guy. Okay, he says, Hazman murkav miyom v'layla. He says time is comprised or composed of day and night. Right, it's the rhythms of time, and similarly is human life. Time made of light and dark. Right, again, he's meaning that metaphorically, rising and falling. Right, times of fullness, times of emptiness, times of accomplishment, and times of feeling unworthy. Right, and as is known in the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and actually here's Susie. Remember, we were talking about actually like kind of Hasidic ideas around variation and change. He's citing the kind of ur text from the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, the legendary founder of Hasidism. And he says, Sheva yipol tzadik v'kam, right? A tzadik will fall 7 times and rise. Now, you'd think like a tzadik, right? Like the righteous person, they would be someone who can be constant and consistent. They're not someone who's going to get felled by experience or felled by their fear or what have you. But no, it is a universal aspect of human life that your experience of life changes. You're never always on one madrega. You're not always on one level. You are going up and you're going down. Something's going to knock you down, but you're also able to pick yourself up and then keep on growing and keep on climbing. I think, again, like a universal aspect, because we saw it going back to the Gemara, all the way back to Adam Rishon. Adam is beset by a sense of guilt and anxiety about his sin, but then also to find relief afterwards as well, right? Even Adam Rishon falls and rises. For 7 days make a week, and then another set of 7 days begins again, right? So again, he ties it back into this metaphor of time, experience of time, but meaning something to human life. 7 days, the cycle, it never ends, right? The week ends, but it keeps on then going, right? The sun sets, but then it rises again, like we saw again with Adam Rishon. Still, even in a time of darkness, one needs the light of the moon or of the stars, which also have light of their own. As we see in the beginning of Maseches Pesachim, referring to the search for chametz. There is never truly complete darkness. You never have complete darkness. There's always in some way, even the darkest, deepest night of the winter, right? The winter solstice is still comprised of darkness and light. It's never purely light. It's never purely dark. There's always in some way murkav. It's always a harkava. It's always complex. It's always composite. It's always born of a relationship. You're never fully in the darkness. There's always sparks of light. And conversely, you're never, fully in the light in a sense, because life isn't constant. You will need to fall to climb. All right. And in one's house, to search for chametz, what do you need? The light of a candle. And here's where I want to say, we're going to learn about Hanukkah now, but from Passover. In one's house, you need the light of a candle. Again, metaphor, metaphor, metaphor. What does he mean when he say one's house? He means in the chambers of your heart. So when you're searching for chametz, externally speaking, you're looking for the Cheerios that slipped beneath the cushions, fine. But really, spiritually speaking, what are you doing when you're searching for chametz? You're beginning an interior search within the nooks and crannies in every chamber of your heart. The chambers of your heart in which one needs the clear light of a candle to check within for the sourdough starter. This is an excuse for me, of course, to use a prop. Now, the phrase in Hebrew in the Chumash is Seor Shebe'isa. And you know it's Seor Shebe'isa. See these holes? This is leavening. All right, this is chametz literally happening. This is the origin of chametz. Right, it's a leavening agent. It causes leavening to occur. It causes chametz. Okay, so the key, and if you look at this footnote, if you want to look at it, but Seor Shebe'isa is used in rabbinic idiom to not just refer to a sourdough starter, but also to refer to your Yetzer Hara. It's the your urge for your id. Basically, it's your id, like your urges, what things that you feel like you need to do. Now, interestingly, the rabbis have a very interesting and complex relationship to the Yetzer Hara. They think you need it, but you need to tame it, right? You need to sublimate it. You can't just let it run rampant. But Hanukkah is a time for us to be able to do actually back to Leon's point in the beginning, where it's like Yom Kippur. You're doing a cheshbon nefesh in the Hasidic account of Passover. You're looking inside of yourself and looking for that which has become sour, right? I think the word, like, if you know, what's the word for pickles in Hebrew?
I forgot.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought that was a layup. I'm sorry. It's chamutz. Yeah, chamutzim. Exactly. It's chamutz, right? It's literally the same. You know, we think of like, oh, it's chametz. It's like bread, but we forget, where does bread come from? It comes from something sour. Right? Chametz, something, and I think that helps make metaphor much more easy for us in terms of looking for chametz inside of us. It's not, usually like, oh, it's stuff that's become puffy, your ego. But actually think of it in this terms. What has become sour inside of you? Right? What has soured? Right? What is inside of us, like, in a sense, it's become acidic, right? It's become in some way, it's eating away at us in some way or another, right? It's not palatable anymore. What do we need to get rid of? Okay.
Habits, bad midot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to do a laundry cycle inside. Okay. So it's much better to, and so what, I mean, here's a question though. Here, you're not allowed to do this in the daytime. You have to look for chametz at night. Why? Because at night is when the light of the candle is most effective. And it's I want to think about the metaphor here, right? You need to use a candlelight or a lamplight to look for chametz after it's dark. It needs to be after it's dark. Why? Why not use, like a photographer would, natural light? Right? Why not rely on the more powerful light of the sun rather than, or why you're not even allowed to use a torch? You need to use a candle. It needs to be small. Why? It seems irrational. Also worth noting, we're literally like holding exactly in this in Daf Yomi. So it's especially like a nice, again, Inyana de Yoma, Inyana de Daf Yomi. Sho says because there needs to be darkness. So you're saying, I think what you're saying, you're implying that there needs to be a contrast, right, between the impact or the effect of the light and the surrounding environment. The contrast helps you see something with more exactitude. Very nice. What else?
Using a small light would make you have to get closer to the corners, get closer to the chametz.
Yeah, exactly. If you're going to do a thorough search, interestingly, like think actually a more powerful light source. Okay, so why not daylight? Because daylight is variable, right? If it's a cloudy day, it means you're actually not going to do a great job. Only way to actually, you need actually artificial conditions. You need to be intentional about the way that you do this. You use the candle, and it needs to be something that will be exact. You know, the contrast will help things come into sharpness. And you're quite right. If it was a bigger lamp, like an avuka, a torch, like you use on Havdalah, then actually maybe it would be so big that you might actually cause danger. You could like burn something down because it's such like a bigger flame. So I think that's actually a really interesting metaphor too. You know, that's just in Psachim. The Hasidim don't get into this, but I wonder, like, you know, when we do our search for internal chametz, like our ego and things like that, like, are we also in a sense needing to not be overly scouring ourselves? We should. This is not self-punishment, but rather it is a search that helps us in a healing way. Shosh also suggests that maybe there's also more rigor at night. That's a great point. You're more like, you know, you make a point to do it, or you make a point to do it. Okay, so again, we're going to translate it like Reb Tzadok is, from the external experience of looking for chametz in our house to the internal experience of looking in every nook and cranny inside of us for what there is that's soured, what there is that's not serving us anymore, what there is that is eating away at us in some way. With it, i.e. with the candle, one can search within for what has soured within the inner recesses of our hearts to the extent that one's hand can reach, nullifying the chametz in one's heart. And it's an amazing pun he just did, because the notion is actually like, if you have chametz that you don't own, but it's in your property, you can say mevatel es chametz beliba, or you can actually nullify it in your heart, meaning in your mind. But he now like literalizes it and says you are actually nullifying the chametz that exists in the locus of your heart, right? In your heart is where you're searching, right? The center of your soul, the center of your emotional self, the center of your values, your character. You're looking in every aspect of it to look for chametz, right? To look for that which has soured. And then again, it's the night isn't the end. The night is a stage, and we move from the night into the daytime. He says, bathing in the light of the sun the next day, complete your purification. It's like the sunlight actually becomes a mikvah for you. Now that you've looked for, you know, you've done your bedikas, right? And you've done your cleaning, right? You cleaned your body, you're fresh and you're ready, and you're like right before Yom Kippur, right? And you go to the mikvah, and you're immersed in it. So the nighttime is the long dark night of the soul, like Leon like started this whole, you know, session with this comment. And then the daytime, but the night ends. The night ends. And the daytime then is what we can be immersed in afterwards. Okay. So to tie it all together, what we don't have here is a reduction. I totally agree with Amy's intervention. I'm not making the like hippy dippy point that like, oh, Hanukkah is like a winter solstice holiday. But rather, I think what winter solstice holidays, which we see an acknowledgement of in the Talmud, and Hanukkah have in common is that they are both robust responses to the real human experience of what it means to be in the midst of deep darkness. But Hanukkah, unlike the winter solstice, is not just about actually passively accepting the rhythm of nature, but holds on to Adam's first relationship to it and says we have a place in what it means to exist within deep darkness, and our role within that is to bring light into it. And then, what does it mean to light a candle in the darkness becomes not just a halachic question for the choreography of the holiday, but it becomes a deep and powerful spiritual question for, going back again to the question that was asked just a few minutes ago, what does it mean for us then to light the candle on Hanukkah? What does it mean for us to do that? Is there some power that we're bringing into our lives to sparkle light in the darkness? And I don't think it's an accident that it's Beis Hillel's version of the ritual that won over Beis Shammai's. Shammai says you start with 8 lights and then you diminish and go down. But Beis Hillel says no, you start with 1 and you build up to 8, which I really think is more responsive to the rhythm and the nature of Hanukkah, to begin in the deepest darkness, but to believe in our ability to bring light into it, and in the hope of what it means for a new day to rise. This is, again, when we talked about like why this class now, we have a week to go to Hanukkah, because every holiday needs its own hachana, it needs its own preparation. So we have a whole week to really think about, you know, it's a dark Passover, as it were, right? What does it mean for me to actually really delve into the darkness, accept my place within it, and what does it mean to sparkle light and to begin to look for what I can bring light and illumination to? So I wish us all fortune in that preparatory work. And I wish us all a lichtigen Chanukah, an illuminated holiday. God willing, I'll see you Tuesday. Is the last session of the Kabbalah class. I hope you can join about what's divine about being human and what's human about being divine. Thursday we have first night of Hanukkah, so very exciting. So woo Hanukkah. This Saturday night we have our Havdalah. Next Saturday night we're also going to have like a Hanukkah candle lighting / Havdalah thing, so we'll be able to light Chanukiot together. And then a week from Tuesday we're going to have a Hanukkah class that I mentioned, one about the mystical significance of Hanukkah, of the being able to find divinity in the dark. So it'll be kind of a follow-up to this, but new texts, new ideas. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope, again, you have a lichtigen Hanukkah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.